I mean,
You're the
are
one
you?
that got elected at the first meeting.
Oh, okay,
Right?
okay,
What's that?
You got elected first meeting, right?
okay,
And so did Craig.
okay.
So Chair Dodd.
Well, okay, then why don't we, Ray, since you're moving, why don't y'all move to front and center, and Dwayne, I'll move over, and you move over. There you go.
We'll call the meeting to order. It's 10:04 a.m. Is there, well, I guess we'll just go down the agenda.
Start with introductions.
Okay. We'll go around the room and just go ahead and introduce ourselves and who we're with. You could start.
Good morning. I'm Orlando Bagcal. I'm representing Tarrant County College.
Good morning, David Campos with Texas State Technical College.
Good morning, I'm Tiara Woods with Klein Cain High School, representing Klein ISD.
Gary Tomerlin, Deputy Assistant Commissioner here at the Coordinating Board.
And Dwayne Hiller, a Program Director here at Workforce at the Higher Education Coordinating Board.
Jerry Graber, I'm with Leonard Contracting.
Craig Jeffrey, representing Blinn College.
Natalie Smith, Workforce Development at KBR.
Ricardo Uribe from Broadsport College.
My name's Ray Tonjes. I'm a home builder here in Austin representing Texas Association of Builders.
I'm Walter Pate, Pate Architects and Texas Classic Homes, actually also representing the Texas Association of Builders.
All right, so we'll look at the review and approve the meeting minutes from February 24th that we had here at the coordinating board. Has anybody had a chance to look over them and everything?
So moved.
Ray moves. Do we have a second?
Second that.
David Campos.
And, maybe if I could jump in here for just a minute. Obviously, a meeting date from February 24th to more than a year removed is a long time. But of course, I think obviously we know we had quite a few programs of study subcommittees that were meeting, which is what we're really doing today. And then I guess this group was scheduled to meet, and we actually got iced out, isn't it? Or was it? I think it was ice. Yeah, then we didn't have a quorum and stuff. So it's the work has been going on. We just kind of ran into some challenges, but so hopefully, as we reacclimate today, we will remember all this stuff that we've talked about before.
So minutes approved. So we'll move to agenda item number 3, which is the public testimony. We don't have anybody. Does anybody want to comment before we move to number 4? members of the board? All right, so we'll go to number 4, which is review of the architecture and construction programs, primarily just the subcommittee reports. And the first one on that is item number A, which is building construction technology subcommittee. Chair with that one.
And
If I'm
just,
not mistaken, that review went through the board already?
right, I was
Right.
about to say, you have in your packet the construction management program of study it did go to the board last January and has been approved by the board. So this is just reporting that it's an approved program of study.
Is there any additional work that we need to do on this? Any action?
No, it's really just information, or if you have any questions about it.
Okay.
Ray?
Where do we find where it's been approved? Is that documented?
It eventually will be on our website under program of study.
But
We're still
shouldn't that be
working
part of this agenda? If we're going to be reviewing these and if it's already been approved? I mean, it's
Oh, I
confusing.
mean, it had come to this committee last time we met, and then it had been approved and then gone to the board. So this is just a final report, I guess you would say.
And so you looked at the courses last time in that one. We can get it for you, like at the end of the meeting as an example. But to Dwayne's point, once, assuming we move forward with all these that are on the agenda today, our tentative plan is to take them to the September, October board meeting, and then they'll all be published on our website. And we're talking about both fields of study, the academic pathways and programs of study, literally all the time. We were asked by our gov relation folks to do kind of a summary document of where are we earlier this week, quite honestly, and we did that and provided it. And it was somebody in the legislature requesting it, but we can get that for you before the end of the meeting if you like.
I have no interest in looking at it. It's just that this isn't identified on the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have a cover page. It's under the 4A, Building Construction Technology POS Subcommittee.
But it's titled Construction Management Program Study. Is that
Right.
one and the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Question for clarification. Do the recommendations from today have to be posted for public comment before the board, or how would that process work?
They've been out for comment, right?
Well, not the new ones,
Okay.
because we have a couple of new ones that will go out for public comment.
Okay. So, Dwayne, why don't you just briefly on 4 tell us the status of each? Either this is the first time the committee's heard it, it's the board, or where we are.
Okay, I was going to do that as we went along, but for design documentation, the general drafting program of study is going before the board in July, and the architectural drafting will go to the board in September, pending this committee's approval. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning will go to the October board, pending this committee's approval. And electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting will be presented today for approval, and again, will also go to the October board, following the public comment period.
So just so we all understand the complete process, once the board approves these programs of study, what's that information gets distributed to all of the colleges that are participating?
Yeah, and yeah, we are already talking about, and we'll continue to talk with the community colleges, both about adopting the programs of study. we've talked several times in the committee about trying to scale at the state level, have more commonality and that kind of stuff. And then we also have a committee that I've talked about, the WECM Leadership Committee, which has to do with the technical course inventory. And we are asking them to look at processes of the number of courses in the inventory and the frequency with which the courses are taught. And as an example, if you remember in the general drafting one, that group identified 3 courses, I believe it was, and rewrote those 3 courses into 1 course, and then recommending 2 courses to be archived. And the goal is trying to both encourage adoption, but then also encouraging or streamlining the number of courses available. And that will kind of, I sometimes refer to it as trimming the tree at both ends, if you will. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And so over time, we will work on this. And of course, this is the building and architecture, as y'all know. Health sciences, we're about 8 or 9 programs of study in on that one. And so it's very, very similar process. And then the same kind of conversation about WECM. And then hopefully we're going to start looking at other disciplines and then scale this and grow this. Does that make sense?
So the design and documentation program of study, there are actually 2 programs of study under that item? Is that what I heard? Because one was going before the board in July and one was going under the board. Is that correct?
That's right. There's a general drafting program study and then the architectural drafting.
Okay.
And they're very similar, except a couple of courses in architecture for the architectural drafting.
I guess I should have added that, the statute that created the program of study, the process that we're undertaking here, it has a requirement that if there's a board-approved program of study and a college adopts it, and then a student transfers to another college, that the student sequences the student, those hours go with the student. The best way to describe it is if the student is 30 hours in and they move across town or Houston or wherever, the student's 30 hours in. And so that's the reason, part of the reason for the work is to try to help students, but then also try to help business and industry, and then understand the sequence in the programs, and then the alignment, hopefully trying to attract more students into these programs of study, help them understand the pathways and the opportunities. I was reading an article yesterday, and I think the city of Denver, which is not Texas, I know that obviously, but they're talking about they need 30,000 workers, and they have $4 billion worth of projects starting. And Natalie, I mean, I would not be surprised if Texas is not much bigger than that, and a much larger need, but that's just a kind of a statistic that was in front of my face because I saw it yesterday. And so that's part of the rationale why we're doing this.
Okay, like I said, the next packet shows the minutes from the Design and Documentation Program of Study Subcommittee. And following those minutes, it's about 10 pages, then there's the General Drafting Program of Study. It's like on the back of page 10, or the 10th page. And that's showing the program of study that's going before the July board for approval.
Now that's for the general drafting, and then
Right.
another 10 pages in gives you the architectural drafting.
Right, and following that,
study.
I'm sorry, yeah, just following that is just kind of a printout of all the course changes that were recommended, course descriptions and edits, and then the comments from the field for the general drafting program study. And then finally, about third page from the end, or second page from the end, is the proposed architectural drafting program of study, along with the two courses that were revised for that program. And this is the one that, and David, were you on that committee? So the subcommittee is proposing this architectural drafting program of study for approval from this committee.
Are we going to discuss each one?
Just saying, and then I guess the following packets, we have the same type of information for the other two programs of study as well, where we have course descriptions for the heating and ventilation and for electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting. Well, just waiting for this committee, we need to approve the architectural drafting program of study, see if there's any questions or discussion.
Well, we probably need to have somebody that was on the subcommittee just lay it out, talk about it, talk about the conversations,
Okay,
and so forth.
yeah, and that's, yeah, on the design and documentation, like the last 2 pages.
Yes, once again, me and Mr. Walter Pate were part of that subcommittee, correct, Mr. Walter? And we had a good discussion, and after going back and forth, we decided on the following courses. If you look on page number 1 of summary notes and minutes for design and documentation program study subcommittees, the last 2 pages, you have a list of all the courses that were recommended by the subcommittee. It starts with DFTG 1305 or the 1405. That's like an introduction. All right, and then it goes into architecture drafting residential. That's DFTG 1317 or 1417. And then it goes into parametric modeling and design, DFTG 1345, 1445. It gets a little bit more into structural drafting, RC 1352, 1452. And then intermediate computer-aided drafting, DFTG 2319 or 2419. We have architectural drafting commercial, DFTG 2328, 2428. Advanced computer drafting, DFTG 2332, 2432. Final project, advanced drafting, DFTG 2338, 2438. And then last, we get into MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, RG 2352 or 2452. So that's what the subcommittee decided to recommend. Any questions?
If I may, let me just add a couple of comments. There was quite a bit of involvement, quite a bit of discussion among the subcommittee members of that. A lot of back and forth. I think a lot of that interaction produced, I think, very, very good results, and I would just hope that the subcommittee would approve what was done. It was a lot of good interchange. I thought it was a very good process, even though it's kind of spread out over time. The end result, I think, is very good, both from looking at it from the viewpoint of an industry member, which I am, an industry person, and the educators. There was, I think, excellent results that came out of that. So I would hope that this committee would just go ahead and approve it and forward it.
You know, if I can maybe add to that just a little bit, you know, I think in the meeting you're talking about, and then just a general observation of all the committees, you know, because I've sat in hours and hours of these things, many different disciplines. Oftentimes the conversations are not really about the skills. You know, they need to know how to do this, and that kind of things. It's the functionality of the courses, and where this college has these 3 skills in that course, and this college has 2 of those skills in this course, and 1 of them in another course, and that kind of stuff. I think at the end of the day, the consensus is kind of like, yeah, this is what it looks like when they leave. But our course vehicles, the way we've built those, have kind of been our stumbling block, if you will. And I think that was a lot of the conversation of just trying to figure out how to package that. And then I think there were some conversations about the enhancements and the tweaks, and I don't remember if it was the architecture or if it was the general drafting, but I remember the conversation about blueprint, and that
It was the general drafting, yes.
yeah, that the preference of using blueprint, but then from a business and industry point of view, blueprint was not this century, kind of a comment, if you will.
Dwayne, I just had one question. Let's say for courses that have laid out on different subcommittees, and let's say a current college offers pretty much all of them, but maybe not 100%. Would they allow for a substitution? I'm just curious because I'm looking at parametric modeling, and I know one college may not have that option, so would they adopt that course or try to bring that on board? Or would they just look for a substitute?
So I guess the scenario would be if a student took parametric modeling and then came to another college that didn't offer that course. So they would get credit for that course, but then they would still need to complete the program of study at that college.
And so maybe to add to what Dwayne said, if that particular course, not if, I mean, when it is, assuming this is all approved and goes forward, there's not an absolute requirement for the college to adopt it, but if a student were to transfer, then it kind of, as I said earlier, earlier I said 30 hours. Let's pretend that the student has taken only that course. That student has 3 hours or 4 hours, depending on if it's a 3-hour course or a 4-hour course, towards that drafting program at that college. And so then the drafting degree is limited to 60 semester credit hours. 15 of those are gen ed. That leaves you 45 for the technical. So that student either has 3 or 4 of those technical hours. And, you know, and so if if it comes down to they have a slightly different course, and David, I don't know, and you might be able to help me as well. I remember there was conversation in one of the programs to study to where we had solid modeling and maybe this course, 3D modeling or something, and we had we had used different zip codes, and that because we had given them different zip codes, whenever we gave them zip codes, y'all, or classification of instructional programs, that some colleges were interpreting that you had to have this skill set, and some colleges were interpreting that you had to have that skill set, and that's why we had the two courses. But everybody agreed the content's the same. But for the purpose of the program of study, the course transfers and applies. I mean, they can take that 3D modeling, and then they can still require them to do the 3D modeling that they have, if they have it. But the student has those hours. Does that make sense? I probably went too far than what you needed, but part of the goal is to limit this concept, and this is true both in our program of study initiative and our field of study initiative, is sometimes we hear the saying that the courses transfer. That's only half of the problem. The courses have to transfer and apply. And it's pretty much pointless of, well, we'll give you 60 hours of lower division credit. Unfortunately, none of it applies to your degree. And, and it's like, well, what's that doing for me? And of course, if it's not in the major, that's kind of a different conversation. I mean, if you got 60 hours over here in health science or something, and then you decide you want to be over here in drafting or architecture or whatever, well, you're going to have a hard time crosswalking those courses. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you took a slight different flavor version of this drafting course versus that drafting course, and we're like, no, that's not the same thing. And so that's what we're trying to level.
Gary, I remember, and you're right, you're correct, you remember correctly, but we spent a great deal of time working on describing what those various courses would entail, the terminology, the description of what the outcome should be, what that student should expect to learn from that course. I think we spent a lot of time working through that, and I think we're very successful at it. So, Ricardo, when you get down looking at that one, I think the description, not just the course number, but when you look at the description and the expected outcome, it's going to make it, I think, far simpler for those counselors that are saying, yes, not only do you get credit for these hours, but this is equivalent to this course that we're teaching that's got a slightly different name and a different zip number.
And we don't know how many students have been adversely impacted, but just because we made a decision to assign a number, a course has to have a zip code, and we assigned it, and then all of a sudden we see that as a barrier. And we had a similar conversation in one of the health science groups about the uses of, Dwayne, I don't remember, it was clinical and practicum or something, and all of a sudden the faculty are talking about the definition of those, and kind of globally, externship is really and truly what we're talking about. Somehow the student is outside of the classroom and out in business and industry getting some type of skill, and the nuances of the definitions and how they were operationalizing that is like, okay, wait a minute, I think we have artificially created these buckets, and now we're construing those buckets, and we're tripping ourselves over definitions that we intended to clarify. And so I hope we're addressing some of those kind of things, and we're identifying those. I know that we internally, that's a conversation we're having about, the zip codes within a discipline. Should all the courses have the same zip code? And what level should that zip code be? And so we'll work with the Welcome Leadership Committee on that as well as we move forward to try to figure out how to just make this as seamless as possible. And I'm obviously not talking about taking drafting courses and putting them over in a computer science zip code or anything else. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't create problems unintentionally.
So, just, you mentioned something about how the colleges are not going to be required to teach all these classes. Is that correct? Right. So, like you said, if one college is not teaching the parametric modeling, but they don't teach that class at all, they're not going to be required to teach that class?
No, the statute does not mandate, but it does have the transfer piece. We're going to encourage adoption, and then hopefully also working with the WECM Leadership Committee as we trim the number of courses. Hopefully, back to my trim the tree on both ends kind of thing. It's easier to move to persuasion than it is to mandate. I was talking to somebody recently, kind of like being like Darth Vader, and I said, the power of persuasion is far more powerful than the power of mandating, because almost any time you get a mandate, it's just like a bitter taste in your mouth, But if you can get groups together and have conversations, and then have the consensus and the meeting of the minds, as Walter has kind of added, it's more powerful. And of course, there'll be iterations of these. And so this time, and David, I don't know, y'all help me out. I mean, I think there's approximately 100 drafting courses in WECM, and we have room for 15 drafting courses in our programs. You want to turn your microphone on and say wow for the record? But while we did reach consensus this time, what if we get it down to 50 courses over time, and then come back and have a conversation? Well, and we, meaning y'all, the faculty, they kind of agreed on the learning outcomes and the skill set. We have all these courses, and the example of the 3 courses combined into one, and I think we just need to find more opportunities to do more of that work. And then I think it will merge us, closer and closer to synergy over time, and then business and industry will ultimately drive this. I don't think I've shared it with this group, because this group hasn't met in so long, but some of the subcommittees. I was at a meeting at the Railroad Commission. This is sometime last winter, like perhaps around November or December, I don't remember exactly, but there were a bunch of representatives from the oil and gas industry there. And they said, they were talking about various colleges, and I'm not going to name those colleges here since there might be some people watching, but they were like, why can't the programs just be the same? And so I kind of said, well, because they were talking about different parts of the state, and I go, well, I assume you're working with this person at this college, and this person at this college, and that person at that college, and they're like, yeah. I said, well, all you have to do is get them all together and tell them to do it, and they'll do it, and then tell them you talk to me, and tell them that if they'll submit the stuff to me, I'll get it approved the same day you submit it. So it's really not that hard. And so, and then I got calls from those people. But it is important from a business and industry point of view, and we are working in that direction. And while it might be quicker if we just took a machete or a other type of slicing instrument and do it. Yeah, but I think we'll get far more buy-in over time if we move, and we're making progress both with this group and the WECM Leadership Committee, and bureaucracy is slow. I mean, that's all I can tell you is bureaucracy is slow, but we are moving forward.
Any other comments on the architectural drafting program of study? We get a motion to approve?
So move.
Second.
I'll ask if any other discussion just for
Any other discussion? Okay.
then a vote.
All in favor to accept the architectural drafting program of study?
Aye.
Aye. Nays? No? Ayes have it. We need to do the same for the general drafting? No? That's all encompassing. Okay, okay. So then we move to the heating and ventilation and air conditioning.
Ricardo, you're part of this. Do you want to kind of say a few words on this guy?
I remember pretty good consensus about the AC courses, or heating and ventilation. And I know I took it back to my college, and faculty there, I think, had all the courses except for one. And so they were pretty positive as far as the course selections that we had.
And on the very last page has all the courses listed, the 24 total credits, or max total credits.
So, and I guess just to clarify, on the minutes of the November 11th, 2017 meeting, and we're looking on page 2, number 5, says the subcommittee agreed to make the following recommendation to the Architecture Construction Advisory Committee. The title of the program will be Heating, Air Conditioning, Ventilation, and Refrigeration Technology and Technician. The description of the program is a program that prepares individuals to apply technical knowledge, skills, and basic engineering principles to design, construct, repair, install, service, maintain, and modify the systems of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. It includes instructions and diagnostic techniques, the use of testing equipment, the principles of mechanics, the operation, inspection, and maintenance procedures, electricity and electronics as they relate to the repair of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration systems. And then there's a list of courses that make up the program description, a program of study. The course descriptions are also attached. So the total program is 18 to 24 semester credit hours, and then the colleges are allowed to add additional courses. And again, this is where they go into specializations of whether it's residential or commercial HVAC. But these are the subcommittee recommended these 6 courses. More or less, that's the core of the program of study. Mr. Carter was, like I say, it was about 9 months ago, so it's hard to.
It was a good meeting, though. Like I said, the courses that we chose at the end, I took them back to my local college, and we had good responses. Actually comes at a good time as the colleges are working on pathways as well. And so at the bottom where it says no specific general education courses were recommended, that's something we're working on now with other local community colleges and even for the transfer option. So we could say, hey, for this discipline, besides the basic math requirements, what additional math or specialization can they have or should they have? And so if we can plug that in, even if it's English and speech and communications and business presentations, how can we kind of load that into our program and say, hey, here's the best pathway as well?
And, you brought up a topic and it kind of rung a bell with me. And, the community colleges across the state are working on pathway projects. Probably, I believe every community college is engaging in the American Association of Community Colleges Pathway Initiative. And of course, so much of our work fits into that. And of course, our work has statute behind it that requires the transferability piece, as I've discussed. So I think we're all moving in the right direction. But many of y'all are probably aware, the community college folks here, that legislation during the last session authorized baccalaureate degree programs at community colleges, and certain restrictions and stuff. And the first of those programs are being reviewed and under consideration and that kind of stuff. And actually, we're starting to deal with the process of creating all these new upper division courses at the junior colleges. And I actually asked a college yesterday to make a modification in what they had proposed for their courses from a rubric point of view and adopt another one. And then we have a process where we're going to put those courses. And my point is, we're going to start asking the colleges to share on day one, as opposed to where we are now, because we've all diverged, and now we're trying to come back to the center a little bit. And so thus far, the colleges are really engaging in that conversation and saying, yeah, it makes sense. And so, I guess my point is if we could wipe all this out and start over, which we can't, I know that. Wow, it would be so much easier. But we're going to try that on the upper division stuff. We're going to try to start closer together and not let it diverge out too far. But it's just, I think it kind of shows that the colleges, and they understand the importance of the pathways, and that starting together, it's easier to stay together as opposed to starting apart and trying to come back together.
Does anybody else have any other comments on that? Or any questions on the courses chosen? All right. This will, for a motion?
I'm sorry. No, I'm saying go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So move to a motion unless we have any other comments, critiques.
I'll make a motion to approve. David?
David? Seconds. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 No nays. All right, motion carries. All right, so then item number 4D, which is electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting subcommittee. So we'll kind of do the same situation. Just let, I guess, Natalie, you're up on the talking dock. I'll let you kind of talk about what y'all went over.
Okay, thank you. I was co-chair of this subcommittee, and it originally started as electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting, and that was a lot of material to grapple with, so I'm going to try to summarize some of the discussions and break up our recommendations into two parts. So one of the initial things we did was to break apart plumbing and pipe fitting. Those are fundamentally different crafts. and one is more residential, commercial, the other is primarily industrial. They are apples and oranges, so we broke that apart right away. And then when we delved into the electrical, also there are sector differences between commercial and industrial and kind of peripheral industries such as power line work or power generation and utilities and things like that. So the other factor kind of complicating the discussion is, especially in the industrial sector, most of the industry employers for these crafts rely on and demand NCCER. And traditionally, what we've, if I could just provide a little bit of history with this, I've been involved in craft workforce development for 15 years, and in Texas specifically for 5. Historically, what we've tried to do to kind of manage that growth of the talent pipeline within the high schools and colleges is try to work with education to do a gap analysis, crosswalk, try to adapt that industry standard to the academic standard. And to be quite honest with you, it's had mixed results. The quality of, and not calling out any systems in particular, but the quality of craft education, depending on the area, the college, employer engagement, industry participation in these schools is inconsistent. There are also, because our craft workforce is a traveling workforce, consistency and ease of transferring and applying credits to Dr. Tomalin's point is critical. Right now, we have, I just represent one employer, but we have a lot of work coming up all up and down the Gulf Coast, the Southeast. Even if you're traveling to other states, that money is feeding back into the Texas economy. So we need that ease of transfer. And there's a translation problem. We know what NCCER standards mean because we help build that curriculum and system. So it's easy to say, for example, if you look up someone who has a module in electrical theory for NCCER, we know exactly what that means. We know what the baseline is. We can supplement and adapt to their training as needed. If you get an electrical theory code from the academic standpoint, it could mean a variety of things. The emphasis could be different. So what we ultimately decided and recommended as a subcommittee is twofold. One, we're recommending that we add an entirely new rubric to the WECM. And I know that's exactly what you want to hear, is something being added. But hear it out. We want to, crosswalking and modifying NCCER doesn't work and watered down the standard. And I forgot to also mention that from the high school perspective, there are fundamental and level 1 and 2 NCCER courses that are already being utilized under the TEA in the industry-based accepted certification. We want to make it easier for those high school students to articulate to the post-secondary level in the same program. We're trying to remove barriers for young people getting into the industry. So the challenge is twofold. One, how do we get a standard in there that industry trusts and that colleges can not get bogged down in translation issues as to what are these course objectives, but also college system, depending on the area of the state and the type of industry you're serving, need that flexibility. We don't want to mandate a single program across the state. That's not appropriate, and it's not effective because each industry is different. So on the one hand, we're proposing a rubric to add, without modification, deviation, or elimination, the NCCER programs in the WECM for electrical, pipe fitting, and plumbing. The second part of that recommendation is we did go through all of the existing courses being utilized, the ones that are available, and we did recommend programs of study for 5 areas, and I can walk through that detail in the packet. We did recommend so-called non-NCCER, 5 areas of programs of study. And our feeling is let the colleges and employers engage with those programs, do what's best. So, any questions so far before I walk through the 5 areas? Okay. So let's deal with the non-NCCER rubric first. Again, a lot of this is self-explanatory, but if you start on the recommendations under the various programs of study, we've got a course structure for industrial electrician. And a lot of this was informed by our industry-based training in partnership with what some key programs in the colleges are doing, specifically Lee College in San Jacinto North and Central. They have really strong programs in this sector. So we've got industrial electrician on the following page. We've broken out the commercial and residential. Some of the so-called fundamentals of these 2 programs overlap. On the commercial and residential side, you do have more code-driven issues, municipal requirements, licensing, et cetera. Following that, we have line worker, which was kind of, if memory serves, it was lumped together under the electrical stuff before we broke out line worker, the separate program of study. When we kind of drilled down and analyzed what these occupations actually do, there's not a whole lot of overlap between a line worker and an electrician. And as you can see, we pulled from other code, not just the ELPT code, but we did pull from some line worker codes to flesh out this program. On the following page, we have pipe fitting. By pipe fitting, we mean industrial. I think we ended up at anywhere from 15 to 19 core hours there. And the last one is plumbing. And the pipe fitting and the plumbing look a little bit thin, but we remember colleges and their industry advisory members still have the flexibility to add as appropriate. What we were trying to do was look at what are the frequency of the courses being used, where are they being used, and are there ones that are redundant or repetitive fundamentally, and in cases where we felt like there were almost identical courses, we just picked one, I think. Feel free to sunset the other. And hopefully, over time, if we have these programs of study in these 5 areas, plus the addition of the 3 rubric for NCCER, our argument is it provides a lot more flexibility for the colleges and employers. And it could be that some of the NCCER courses, because that system is so clear and easy to follow, we're hoping that we actually see more frequent use of that, which will provoke a discussion in the future about some of these other courses. We're just wanting to advocate for this standard we trust, and the colleges that we already work with that are doing this model are turning out fantastic graduates and craft workers. So we would like to see it in the standard. There was one other area, a couple of other peripheral discussions. One was in regards to power generation. That, partly because we didn't have the proper expertise on that subcommittee, we kind of deferred that. But also, I'm not convinced it belongs in architecture and construction. I don't know what other clusters are available, but that might be a manufacturing thing, I don't know. So that we did not deal with, that's still a question mark. There was also some discussion around instrumentation, E&I tech, process technology issues. There are portions of instrumentation that do belong in construction, but some discussion in regards to that, we kind of ended up with that that's probably a manufacturing concern. The last thing is we do recommend there are some crafts or areas of skill that are still missing from this effort, specifically carpentry, masonry, some of what we call the civil crafts. And we're recommending that a subcommittee be established for that and follow the same model where you've got an NCCER rubric and an analysis of what exists. So we're providing both options. As we like to say, clear as mud.
I do believe we have carpentry and masonry subcommittees, but I don't think
don't
that
think
they
there's been a
had the
quorum.
subcommittee. No, they could not, from what I understand, they couldn't convene enough participants.
Right, right, those are the ones we didn't get enough nominations to form a subcommittee.
If we still, I mean, we probably still need to tackle those. And so if we reopen that issue, the subcommittee we were on discussed, we will do what we can to get enough people in there to get a good review of that. And in those committees, we do need more commercial representation, obviously.
Okay, I guess,
Question, discussion?
I guess I want to say we could discuss that, the crafts separately, but I guess for now we just want to look at the program, the proposed curricula.
Okay, and Natalie, just to make sure, so you're saying in the end, ideally, or there would be pipe fitting program like the one we have here, and then another one for the NCCR?
Correct. And the reason part of the rationale behind adding, believe it or not, we weren't trying to shortcut the WECM analysis. We weren't trying to just get out of it. We have tried for years, like I said, to crosswalk these two entities. And it sort of evolved into more confusion than it's worth. So the other piece of why we feel strongly that needs to be separated and added as is because it comes with separate accreditation standards that are third-party verified. And we feel like if college programs choose to implement that standard, they need to be implementing the whole system with oversight over proper performance testing, lab verification, the recommended hours in the course, and all that. So we just don't want to tinker with the implementation standard.
Natalie, I've got a two-part question, and it starts with pipe fitting in the course titles. That's the only one out of the four that lists dealing with, it's called blueprints on this one, but dealing with drawings and identifies drawings or blueprints and being able to comprehend and understand those. The other disciplines, the plumbing, commercial, residential, electrician, and electrical line workers, does not relate, at least in this course, these list of courses, to understanding or reviewing drawings. Is that then something that each college would do as an elective or a prerequisite, or how is that handled?
No, that's a good
Question makes sense?
Yes, it does. And that's a good point. To me, drawings are the fundamental across the board. The reason it's not in here, probably a function of those courses were not being utilized in some of these other crafts, so we didn't put it in here. But if I recall, some of the like residential wiring and industrial wiring do have a drawing component. But I can't remember the course descriptions right off the top of my head. As the electrical calculations, so that's a good point. I mean, we can look to see if there are drawing courses for these other crafts in the WECM and add them.
And I don't know if it really would be a requirement that those students taking that course of study actually produce drawings, but they ought to be able to understand
Interpret them, agreed.
That we could get off on the word blueprint, which Gary has already brought up, but it is a 19th century term,
Yeah,
not a 21st century term. And at some point, there probably ought to be some discussion about that, maybe not in this forum, but replacing that. There was a great deal of discussion in our subcommittee about it. People may still understand it right now, but it doesn't relate to any drawing that anyone's ever going to look at unless it's a historical drawing.
Probably most of the people that understand it have gray hair.
well, from a procedural point of view, to Mr. Pate's point, what I hesitate to do is go back to the subcommittee. So does this body have the power to say, we would like to see drawings added where it's not indicated in these programs of study?
Well, yes, I mean, this subcommittee can add a drawing course if deemed appropriate, but I'm going to kind of ask Orlando here, because Orlando, just information for information's sake, I hired Orlando at Tarrant County College 13 years ago. And when I used to have oversight of the construction program back at Tarrant back then. But, and I think y'all discussed this a little bit about, is it drawing or is it the ability to read and interpret plans?
Just read and interpret.
And that kind of stuff. And, you know, I mean, I think we had a blueprint reading course as an example. And so as I see the faculty around the table kind of nodding their head, so in these courses as a general kind of part of the curriculum, do you have plans or talk about plan interpretation and that kind of stuff? And maybe that's something that we need to look at the courses of, are we specifying the plan interpretation piece, or are we more of focused on the larger piece of we've built it, and of course to build it you got to read the plans.
Well, in the construction management technology, we do have the residential and commercial blueprint reading, and actually the students can learn the skills from civil plans all the way to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing as well. So each of those areas are being taught for the students, for them to learn, because they need to those skills as they build not only the framing or whatever, but it also discusses about mechanical, electrical, and plumbing as well. So I think it's necessary that we need to add those as well into the proposed.
And I don't think anyone on our committee, I mean, I'm stepping out on a limb here, but I can't imagine anyone that does this for a living would be opposed to adding some drawing fundamental to all of these. Incidentally, NCCER program has it across the board. So on that side, we're covered. On the non-NCCER, what's the best path forward? Because we would like to get this to the board.
Yeah, I kind of share your concern about going back to the subcommittee. And while maybe, you know, I've talked about this is the first iteration of all of this, and that these groups will come back together over time. And I think from what I'm hearing, the plan reading piece is at least implied in the courses. And maybe that's something that we can take to the WECM group of add emphasis to those courses. But then if we're going to try to get to these new courses, the NCCER courses, then maybe we just try to make sure that we do those perfectly and then move forward from an efficient use of our time, if you will, if that works for you.
Yeah, I can almost believe if we look through the course curriculum or syllabus of these courses, it would be in there somewhere. It's just maybe not as explicit as, you know, would be nice.
On teaching, I mean, I teach a lot of the ACGM courses, and with students seeing some drawings and explaining it, and then them kind of doing it themselves, whether they're drawing it or they're just kind of messing around with it a little bit, you're utilizing those out. A lot of these people are very visual learner type concepts. I mean, that's what some of these trades are. So I think any teacher teaching this, and I mean, y'all can jump out too and say, I mean, you're gonna pull different elements to help. Some students are going to get it right off. Others need a little bit of oomph to get that. So showing them a set of plans, like I have a set of our Blaine College building plans are sitting in my lab right now. They're always in there, so I always pull them out, show them, because then they can at least see, oh, I know that building. I had government right there. Okay, I see that. So then they can kind of visualize it that way. So I think, yeah, jumping in with that, I think that's.
Yeah, and also the technology is changing quickly.
Yes.
Where we're in the pipe, and a lot of my students at the job are using drones and headsets with point cloud systems and the whole deal. So it's still, in a sense, still visualizing. It's not on paper anymore, but the concept is still always there.
You know, we see it in architectural practice. It's certainly in home building industry as well, that a lot of the drawings that would relate to these particular disciplines, they're schematic in nature. You're trying to get from point A to point B. How you actually run, whether it's wire or pipe, how you run from point A to point B may not be too crucial. It is something that obviously that's important, but being able to understand a drawing and that you've got to get from point A to point B and understand that's a part of the requirement for those that end up pursuing this course of study, I think that's vitally important. But how that's done, please don't take that at any point as criticism, but I think it is important that it's understood, however that's done, Ricardo, but understood that it's these students have got to know that.
Agreed. And you made me think of an example. So under industrial wiring, the outcome is at that journeyman level of an industrial electrician, they be able to read that point A to point B, but they're actually planning and executing how to pull cable. And do they have the proper supports, the proper staff and all that, and the right material? The drawing analysis is implied in that. So.
If I can make a comment, you know, Natalie, as you laid out the new rubric and the NCCER curriculum and trying to move to that over time, and then go back to our question about mandatory adoption a few minutes ago. I think as we do this program of study work, the importance of business and industry talking about this collectively and asking and working with their colleges and saying, hey, look, this is the better way. That's really and truly, I think, what is so important to help us get to commonality, if you will, or meeting the needs. Because, I mean, if, you know, as I've kind of discussed, if we go to the colleges and say, hey, you know, everybody, you need to drop this and add this, they just think that we all have lightsabers or something, and that we're going to, I've heard that they refer to me as Darth Vader half the time, quite honestly. But I think if we can get business and industry to really, you know, have a more common voice and talk about the importance of this, I think that really helps and helps deliver a powerful message to the colleges. You talked a little bit about instrument and control and the demarcation between construction and the drafting piece, and then the manufacturing piece. And we're going to probably look at convening that as a committee next. I think I've mentioned it a couple of times. We actually ran most of last year short-staffed, literally 2 people short. The governor did a hiring freeze, and, you know, we don't have that large of a staff anyway, but it affected us, and that's one reason why we're slow on this. I mean, the weather and other issues. But I think we're going to look at manufacturing next, which will get us into some of those related kind of things or adjacent kind of things, depending on how you want to use the word. And so we'll be heading down that road soon, I hope. So maybe we can continue to move forward in the area that's important to y'all.
You said your question was 2 parts. What was the second part?
sorry, I was going to ask about the word blueprint, and there, with the hope that there's some consistency throughout how we're really using that term or deciding to not use it, which is what I would hope would come out of it, is that we decide not to use the term since it's antiquated.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of telling that we had the same debate in our subcommittee, and the discussion we're having now kind of highlights the issue. When we refer to a certification under NCCER, Introduction to Construction Drawings, we know exactly what that means. The course description is short and clear and lucid. And then when we get outside of that, from an industry perspective, when we get outside of that, we can't agree on what a course in drawing looks like. And so that's some of the translation problems we suffer.
So getting back to the program of study, getting these pushed forward. I know we need to motion for approval and vote on them, but there was some discussion earlier about adding or not adding the plan reading at this point. It sounded like you had recommended letting the WECM folks do that, or for this program itself?
Well, I don't get a vote here. I don't get a vote. Natalie said that she didn't really want to go back to the subcommittee.
Right.
I kind of said I share that reservation.
Right, but she had asked if this committee had the power to, let's add blueprint reading to these programs of study. And it sounded like we're saying, let's move it on to the board and let the next group add it? Is
Well,
that-
no, this committee can add, they can add to what the subcommittee did, because the subcommittee works for y'all. And so you can do it. As Natalie was saying, she didn't want to go back to the subcommittee.
I want to go back to the subcommittee.
And my reservation is taking more of the work forward, if y'all agree, 'cause like I said, it's y'all's. And I think as the faculty members here discussed, and I think Walter, who kind of originally brought up the question that it wasn't so much a drawing course, but reading plans, interpreting plans, takeoffs, those kind of things, and that the faculty members kind of said that they were there in the programs, that if the group was okay with that, then just move forward as presented.
Okay.
And if so, but if y'all want to, it's y'all's committee, is my answer to your question.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense?
Yeah, I don't think we ought to try to micromanage what that subcommittee was doing, but I think we need to push on, realizing that at some point that's going to have to be handled separately. Well, two things. One, Gary, handle in the future the next time this course of study takes place, and some of us won't be here for that, but anyway, next time that happens. But then secondarily, rely on the campuses and the colleges to incorporate the
Plan reading portion to these programs.
Yep.
Okay.
And, what might be appropriate is that y'all could make a recommendation to the Macomb Leadership Committee that as these courses are reviewed, to look at emphasis on plan reading, interpretation, whatever you want to call it, and then as we have teams looking at those courses, that could be provided to them, and it could be perhaps added as a learning outcome. It might be in the course descriptions, and perhaps even in the titles. So, I think as the faculty have kind of discussed, if you're building something, I think it's implied that you got to read a plan normally. I mean, I don't think you go build very many houses like, well, just go ahead and run that wall a little bit further. So I think it probably is implied, but y'all could definitely make a recommendation. We'll take it to them that if you're reviewing these courses, consider adding emphasis where appropriate to plan reading, plan interpretation, and that kind of stuff.
We can include a recommendation in the notes of each program of study.
That'll be
Okay.
an outcome of the committee.
Then let's do that if everybody's in agreement. Okay. So can we get a motion to accept now, we are going to, this motion is for all 4 of these programs of study right? Okay.
Actually 5, but.
5.
If,
Yeah, we've got 5 programs of study, but I would also like to segregate the motion about an NCCER rubric for 3 programs and approve that separately as well, so that there's no confusion.
Okay. So this motion is going to be for the commercial residential electrician, electrical line worker, pipe fitting, and plumbing programs of study,
and there was also an industrial electrician on the previous page.
and the industrial electrician.
You can do them all at once. Maybe you break them out or.
Can we get a motion to move those forward?
I'll submit a motion to approve the 5 programs of study on the non-NCCER rubric for industrial electrician, commercial residential, line worker, pipe fitting, plumbing.
You get a second?
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
And then there was a second motion.
Do you want me to submit
go
the
ahead and
motion?
restate it?
Okay.
Which is basically
I'd like to put forth a motion to adopt a rubric specific to NCCER for electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting without deviation, elimination, or modification.
Does anybody second that?
Second that.
David Campos? All right, so. Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. Yeah, can we have a little more discussion on that before we take a vote? I know it's moved and seconded, but that gets over my head real fast, just because it's not something I deal with. But could you give just a little bit in-depth discussion about what that actually means? I'm sure it means something, Gary, to you guys immediately, but I don't know what it means.
Okay. So I can provide kind of a high-level overview of what the standard is. So in general, for each program, depending on the craft, is anywhere from what they call 2 to 5 apprentice years of development. The shorter ones tend to be, your rebar, concrete. Your longer ones are instrument tech, millwright, things like that. The electrical, pipe, and plumbing programs are about 4 years, and they're typically broken up into 4 levels. And so, as it's implemented in the colleges presently with like Lee College or San Jac, for example, that we work closely with, they tend to do those entire programs over 2 years. More high school, they're starting to deliver the entry in level 1, where graduating students can articulate into a college at level 2 or 3 or 4. Each level is aligned with the Federal Department of Labor, the Apprentice Standard. So it has at least 144 hours of recommended seat time, classroom time, and that is supposed to align with about 2,000 hours of OJT. Now, for students that aren't working, they get that experience after they're hired, but they are free to get that knowledge base in the academic environment. And to actually get credentials or certifications in the tasks that are required of each level, and they get progressively more complex, you have to have a third-party certified instructor sign off and witness the completion of that performance task. So at a very simple level, in a level 1 electrician, you might have to perform specific calculations around Ohm's law or bend conduit, things like that. And so the accreditation piece kind of put that extra oversight into the witnessing of the performance pieces, so that we know if we get a level 1 electrician out of Sanjak in Houston, that should be the same as a level 1 electrician out of Del Mar and Corpus. It's a baseline standard that colleges can add to if they've got employers with specific needs, or we can add to the training in-house, because we also deliver it in-house in our companies. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you for the additional explanation.
No problem.
If I can add to that, and just to inform y'all, what we're going to have to do is, Natalie, I think we're going to have to work with you, and then, of course, we have access to what Lee College and Sanjak are currently doing, but we will have to look and see if they're using local need courses or special topic courses, which are kind of not WECM courses, which we won't even go there from a conversation, but, well, they're a WECM type of course, but anyway. We'll have to look at what courses they're doing. We'll have to discuss the rubric, which I guess might be NCCR. I don't know. Anyway, we'll have to figure that out. We'll have to craft the courses, and then maybe a recommendation from y'all is that once we do that, we will send it out to the committee via email, and that y'all can look at them, and if there's no objections, then we'll just go forward with them. And the courses and the sequence, as Natalie said, about don't change it. So that kind of becomes the program of study. And so we'll have to get all that work done, and then we'll have to push that out, for comments as discussed. But by creating the courses, that creates the program of study because it's sequenced. And so y'all will have to see that. And then once y'all do that, we'll give it to the WECM committee, and they'll go into the we'll inform the WECM committee, but they'll go into the WECM database. That's what Rex and I were kind of talking about as a process of how we're going to do all that. So you're kind of giving us the canvas, if you will, and now we've got to paint it. Does that make sense?
If I may, I'm very familiar with the NCCR curriculum. I've gone through the apprenticeship program, and I currently teach at St. Philip's College in the evening. I teach construction technology classes, and we do follow the NCCR program on the construction technology side, which is now more carpentry courses is what they are. At the college, we have electrical and mechanical programs and plumbing programs as well. And initially, when the college started rolling out the NCCR, there was a lot of pushback from those programs because they are focused on, their history was with IEC, which is a different program, different curriculum. So NCCR is a certain curriculum path, okay? And IEC is independent electrical contractors, I think it is. They have their own apprenticeship. PHCC is very, very similar. They have their own path as well. Those departments were locked into their thing. They're good programs. There's nothing wrong with their programs. I bring that up only because I'm just trying to look down the road. We start pushing this program at a state level. Does that open the door to these other programs? Hey, I want my program pushed through on the state level too. And then you also have, there's other apprenticeship programs as well. You have the unionship programs, and I'm sure there's others that I haven't even mentioned. Does that open the door for them to start pushing for that as well? What I don't want to do is create more work for you guys at this level than is needed. Maybe it needs to be an overall apprenticeship kind of thing, or a trade type push. instead of it's curriculum specific. I'm just,
Well-
it's a conversation that we probably need to have.
Well, and there's a bit, and Rex is leaning up to the microphone, so if he wants to jump in here, but there's a bit of curriculum versus apprenticeship, so college program versus apprenticeship. And as y'all all know, apprenticeships are highly structured and they're on-the-job training. You mentioned the 144-hour classroom piece. So those are kind of some things that are kind of in both federal statute and state statute. And so that's a bit of a conversation. Although there actually are initiatives underway of trying to take the apprenticeship training and back it back into WACM courses to provide an opportunity to where students could get the apprenticeship training piece converted into semester credit hours, which then might help them get into an applied bachelor's or something like that. So in essence, have the lower division piece. And so those conversations are going on, and we're actually funding a project, or partnered in funding a project. But
Quick, just to that point, the Alamo Colleges does have an agreement with the local apprenticeship for that specific component. So they do give them almost 32 credit hours applied to an applied associate. So there are programs out there.
Right. Sorry, right. And the project that we're partnering in is trying to come up with, kind of a common platform across the state of saying, hey, look, here's how you can take that and convert it to these. And it's that faculty have looked at it and agreed that here's a pathway. Here's what that probably equates to. You could still adopt it locally at your institution, but more than anything else, it's trying to take off the independent, the one faculty member, if you will, having to try to make the decision and how to deal with this. So if you have something you can use as a guide already and it's been peer reviewed, it makes the process faster. But to your point about the other organization, independent IEC, I guess you said, independent electrical contractors, I assume those programs are SIP'd in the manufacturing career cluster. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I kind of think. And I talked about this earlier, that's probably going to be the area we're looking at next. We've had conversations about we need to get into the oil and gas industry. And of course, that gets us all the refineries, the petrochem, all that kind of stuff. And I think part of it is in manufacturing, and I think part of it is in transportation, distribution, logistics, because I think pipelines fit in with transportation.
Yeah.
May not be perfect, but it's just where it fits. But so if those programs are there and we can readily work with them to move forward, yeah, it makes sense that we would have those conversations and adopt them as programs of study to encourage the scaling of it. So yes.
I do agree that I do want to kind of clarify the position is, and I'm here for selfish motive because I'm here for my company. And I want to do what makes sense and the least headache for everybody. But some of the apprenticeable programs, they're all fine programs. And there are specific chapters in different crafts. When I say chapters, I mean a brotherhood, if you will, that utilize NCCER from a curriculum standpoint. They may or may not advertise that, but that's a whole separate discussion. It's not quite the same problem in my eyes because what we're proposing is not necessarily a curriculum. What we're proposing is a system of competencies and outcome that's been defined and validated on a national level, and it's very easily portable. And to get that verification in specific outcome, you don't have to be working. Apprenticeship is kind of its own animal, and there are co-op programs in which you're going to school, you're working, and that, I don't know how that could just be dumped into a state standard. But what we're advocating is basically equivalent journeyman mastery of competencies that you can learn in any academic environment before you build your experience. I see it as a more portable option, so.
Are we going to circle back around to this subject then? Because I think we had a second on it, but
Well, I guess are you ready to call the question is there any more discussion, or are you ready to vote on this motion?
There's a motion on the floor.
right, and a
There's a second as well, not just that part. The person who made the motion wants to withdraw it, and then that's seconded by the second, and you have to vote on it. According to Robert's Rules of Order, you need to vote on the motion.
Right.
Gary, let me just ask this question before we call the vote, since we're still in discussion mode. What does adding this, I understood what you said, Natalie. I'm not objecting to, and I do think that there probably are other industry training standards that likely would come to you guys and say, okay, well, if you're including those courses, why aren't you including ours? And I could see how that could really, you get a big ball of worms. And I can't help but think that there's got to be some understanding, particularly when you're talking about some of the trades, when you start getting training in, and I'm just going to pick one, but in sizing pipe or working up fittings or understanding, and whether it's a 1-inch pipe or it's a 24-inch pipe, you're still dealing with pipe. You're still moving something through that pipe, whether it's liquid or gas or whatever. But standards and understanding how, as a trade, how you handle that, I can understand that there's coursework that would do it. But to me, it sort of goes against the whole thing that we started with when you start saying, okay, we want to try to simplify and combine and have the ability for these community colleges to understand what's being done in other curricula and how this relates back, and to try to simplify some things, not complify, but simplify, okay? And then to all of a sudden say, okay, well, let's take these other industry group that's got this curriculum standard and say, let's codify that and put that in then what the community colleges have in their slate of things that they can offer. Surely there's another way to do that without throwing this in the midst of what Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board is doing. To me, that could almost be a total separate study by itself. And I guess I understood what you said, but I don't understand why we want to do that here and do that now.
And I think since you directed that at me, and if it's okay, Natalie, when this subcommittee met, there was kind of reluctance of, oh my gosh, we're talking about growing the tree instead of trimming the tree. But we kind of agreed, and Rex and I have discussed it a couple of times, that this might actually be a end around, if you will, of helping us to get there. Before I came to work at the coordinating board, I was at Tarrant County College, and I worked on several projects. And at one point, we were working on power generation. And the business and industry group we were working with at that time, one of those members said that we had the majority of the megawatts of power production in the state of Texas represented in the room. So we had a pretty big group and, pretty much the right people. And we had done some of the same kind of things that we had done with y'all, of kind of asking what are the learning outcomes, what do the students need to do, what would those look like in courses. And then after we did that, that was one meeting, and then a period of time later, it wasn't a year, but it was a period of time, we brought them back together, and we printed out all of the courses in WECM of all the different rubrics that we're looking at in this space, ELPT, ELCT, whatever they are. Y'all know them, I don't. And we set up tables, and we put up table tents for each of the skills or groups of skills that they had identified. Because when they started identifying skills, we had the big sticky notes, the 2-foot by 3-foot sticky notes on the walls, and they were writing and grouping and organizing. And that was the bucket that was forming the courses that they were talking about. And then we gave the groups a printout of WECM courses that was in a 2-inch binder. And in each page in the binder was a course. You remember this? You were there. Oh, you weren't there? I thought you were there.
That meeting, but
Okay.
yeah, I remember.
But we must have given them, close to 500 courses. I mean, that's about a ream of paper. And they started reading the course descriptions, the learning outcomes, and that kind of stuff. And business and industry, not faculty, they started sorting them under the various table tents that they had made, is this course related to this, yes or no? And then they also made a table tent called Other. Why are y'all laughing? Guess where the majority of those courses went? And I mean, Other had probably half of it, if not more than half. And business and industry, it was saying, hey, y'all really need, and generally their comment was, you're too deep in the weeds, that you're so specific with this, you need to bring this back up a minute. And maybe the comment a minute ago about pipe is pipe, 1-inch pipe or 24-inch pipe, the difference is the volume, is really what you're talking about. But anyway, so to that point, and when the group started talking about this, and as I said, my reluctance of create more, but we do kind of agree that maybe adding more and encouraging adoption might actually help us get to where we're trying to get to now. And the faculty in these disciplines know this better than I do. I would already speculate that we have probably quite a few courses that have part of NCCER, or maybe they're aligned to, or they're targeted, or they speak to a little bit of it, pieces. And so what we're suggesting, or what Natalie is proposing, is to put it in there as a sequence, as a package, and then hopefully over time, all those other little tidbits, the adjacencies, would break off and go away as we move closer to center. And so it does seem like it doesn't do what we set out to do, but we do believe that it will help us get there over time.
I guess we look at it from the point of view of, does it actually provide an opportunity for someone to get the knowledge to go to work? And I can tell you that in a hiring office, if we're looking at a 2-year graduate in electrical that just derived from the existing WECM standard, we're probably not going to spend the time, unless we're engaged with that program, we're probably not going to spend the time trying to figure out what these ELPT things are. But if someone comes with that 2-year degree and a level 4 electrical completion, they're in the door. And so what we're advocating is it actually removes barriers for the students, and we don't see any difference between this and some of the automotive certifications like ASE, or the software certifications like Microsoft, or things like that, to where it's compatible with the standard that's already there. The colleges can still make decisions appropriate to their employer constituency. But if there's an opportunity to also get that portable, instantly recognizable credential for the student, where the barrier to getting hired and advancing is removed, that's really what we're after.
So Gary implied that he convinced me of the efficacy of all this at one point. And either I've changed my mind or I don't remember or something. I actually don't think I've changed my mind, but I'm a little unclear on I guess I'm just a little unclear on exactly what's happening here. So we have 5 programs of study up that were voted on. We have a motion to add to 3 of those 5, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, that if I missed something here. So then we have a motion to add to, or 3 of those 5, the RR, whatever those things are, standards. NCCR, thank you. Standards to that. And I guess my question then is, does that then, and I kind of think this is where you were sort of going with this too then, is does that then lead to 2 programs of study rather than 1? And if we include other standards that are out there, then would that lead to a 3rd, to a 4th, to a 5th, to whatever that upper limit is of programs we have, programs of study, which, as Walter pointed out, I think is not exactly the direction we were headed in. And so I guess, and Gary, I guess your point was that if we adopt the NCCR, then over time we would hope that things would gravitate to that. But we know that might not be the case given everybody's desire to do what they want to do. So, I mean, and that's just something we have to deal with on a regular basis, right? I mean, it's you know, it's part of what makes all this kind of work. So in Texas, it makes it so difficult because we have a 100-year history plus of institutions doing whatever they wanted to do. And it's really true, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but from the standpoint of trying to coordinate that for a student across the state of Texas, it's difficult at best, let me put it that way. And so, I mean, is that what we're doing, is we're actually then creating 2 programs of study within those 3 fields, and then opening the door to actually creating a 3rd, 4th, 5th, or whatever there might be in terms of other kinds of standards or curricula that are out there. And you know, I just want to make sure that I understand where we're going with this.
So you'd almost have, it sounds like we'd have a parallel path, if you will, for industrial electrician, right? One for this program that we're talking about, and one geared with the NCCR curriculum. That's what is currently on the motion to be voted on, correct?
Well,
And I guess, Natalie, I guess correct me if I'm going on the wrong track, but as I understood from the subcommittee meetings, so NCCER requires a certain commitment for the colleges to, you know, hire instructors, a third party,
No.
something like that.
No, nobody's required to hire third-party instructors. If colleges are accredited to do the credentialing as part of the system,
Okay, so
then
college-
at least one representative at the institution would be certified to train the instructors in the process.
Okay.
There's no additional technical expertise or third-party training that's required.
But
for
I
the
guess
instructors.
what I'm saying is what you just described is a certain commitment that colleges have to make to implement the NCCER program.
Yes.
So if colleges do not want to, or cannot afford to, or for other reasons choose not to implement the NCCER, like we say, hopefully over time enough colleges will see the value of that. But at the moment, if a college is not willing or able to implement the NCCER accreditation, then that's when they would use these non-NCCER programs.
Sure.
And to clarify, if I can, and I think you asked this as a question, and Rex, it was definitely your question. We've already approved the pathways of the subcommittee, the 5, under electrical, plumbing, pipe fitting, correct? And now the discussion is adding the NCCER, as Dwayne said, of hopefully over time it'll streamline. And so it's trying to take the existing landscape and pull it together with all the different specializations, and then trying to create a new optimum pathway that we hope will migrate over time.
Yeah, there is another kind of component I'd like to add to the discussion from a strictly for credit perspective. There's not as much enrollment as we would like in craft education in general. From a continuing ed or workforce education perspective, in the Houston region alone, with some of the 3 or 4 systems we work with, there are thousands enrolled in NCCER training. Because it's very easy to say, okay, this is what the industry wants, we're just going to adopt and commit to this program. It's my personal opinion that what they're getting in the workforce side is no more inferior than what is delivered on the academic side. And if we want a truly professional workforce, then that commitment should be recognized at the degree level. So one of the things I think would be an enormous benefit to workers and students in the state is a lot of times these so-called workforce education programs that are just delivering NCCER as it's written and sequenced, those same NCCER modules have been crosswalked to the academic side, but the recognition is completely different, and I don't think it's fair. I think there should be an option for a degree recognition because it takes the same amount of time and sometimes even more commitment because they're doing it at night after working. And so I think one of the critical ways we're going to develop this pipeline of talent is to give that higher education recognition to these programs.
Well, and I don't have a problem with that, and I get the utility of doing this. Like Walter, though, I'm worried about, or I'm not worried about, I just have some questions about the end game, so to speak, and where it is that we wind up 5 years from now, for example. And so if I understand, Gary, what you just said, we just approved 15+ programs of study.
No.
If we have 5 tracks in 3 of those programs already, then one could argue that's 5 apiece. Then we approved 2 others, so that would be at least 17.
No, not necessarily. It wouldn't be
They may be
per-
similar, but they're still different if they're identified as tracks.
There's just 3 under NCCER. Electrical is a single program, pipe fitting is a single program, plumbing single.
Well, Gary, you just said we had approved 5 under more than one of these.
No, under electrical. There.
Okay, so there's 5.
It's one program of study,
But it has 5 tracks.
but it has 5 tracks.
So it has different courses in it. So that's pretty close to 5 different programs of study.
Right.
Okay, I'm just trying to get clear on,
And
as opposed to we may have 50 now,
Yeah.
in
yeah,
effect.
yeah.
Well, not 50 because not everybody has the.
Not everybody has it, but
Okay.
hopefully it does help pull us towards center. And then it's-
Under this subcommittee, we would end up with 8. So 5 on the non-NCCER side, 3 under the NCCER.
Then tracks within each of those 5. Let's be clear, I just want to be real clear and transparent about what we're doing. If you have tracks within those 5, then in effect, that's more than 8. You have different courses within those tracks. That may be okay. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess to clarify, it really is just 5, whether you want to call them tracks. There are like 3 tracks in electrical and then plumbing, 1 in plumbing and 1 in pipe fitting. So the total is 5.
No, we've said this, okay.
Yep.
So when you just added up more than 5.
Yeah,
Because if you've got 3 in electrical,
right, that's 3.
and you've got
1 in
plumbing.
1 in plumbing,
1 in pipe fitting.
and 1 in pipe fitting. So, and that's, okay. But if you've got 3 in electrical, so those are the 5 you just approved.
Right.
Okay. Okay, all right. And I think I'm okay with this. I just want to make sure I understand what you're doing. And I do understand.
And I do understand the utility of the other. And we've had some conversations within CCR folks and others connected to apprenticeship programs and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, by the way. Like I said, I just want to, I have to think about what the long term is. And so, okay.
I agree with the tract as well and the plan. I think it would benefit the workforce a great deal. I'm just trying to look down. I mean, this is not my world. This is your guys' world. I'm kind of looking at it from that side too, and for ease of maybe and avoiding some future pain. That's why I was saying to maybe try to gear these programs not just specifically on this one curriculum path, but give it some openness and some flexibility to allow these other types of programs to take part in it. Follow the same tract as what NCCR is, you know, use that pathway, and as long as it aligns with some of these other programs, it should be okay. It probably will.
I mean,
I hurt my back this morning, so that's what that was about. Yeah, I mean, I certainly would expect it to, because I think at the end of the day, and this is part of why we got into all this work in the first place, because in spite of the fact that you actually have 30 different institutions that offer electrical, and on the surface they're all different, the reality is that underneath they're probably much more similar than they are different, because if you want somebody to be able to do electrical work, that kind of training is pretty much the same. You know, I mean, that's, regardless of how you approach it, in the end, it all turns out to be the same. And then, you know, and I would suspect that whatever NCCR does in plumbing and stuff is not significantly different from what the plumbing, heating, and cooling contractors do.
That's a pipe is a pipe is a pipe. But at some point, when we're talking about portability, because this student starts down at San Jacinto and then ends up in Midland College, and they don't recognize what's happened down there, then what progress have we made?
And you know, Walter, that.
Agreed.
I think actually that, I think that's a very good point, and I think from a progress point of view of, you know, how many bites does it take to eat the elephant? I think the 5 that we approved a minute ago helps the existing situation, if you will, because all of the existing programs that are not using NCCER, or they're using pieces of it, this program of study will go to that space, and hopefully the colleges will begin to adopt it and look at it, and if nothing else, students who take the courses, because it's in a program of study, those courses will transfer and apply. And then what Natalie is proposing with creating the new rubric and creating more courses, which is counterintuitive to our conversation. I think we all agree with that. But then if over time, if we say, hey, this standard is important, and as I've discussed earlier, the importance of business and industry driving the conversation that this is what we want, you know, hey, the coordinating board has a program of study, you know, and you know, I know that there are a few of y'all here. Y'all are representing hundreds of your colleagues out there at all the different companies, and that information has got, collectively, we all have to talk the same conversation. But over time, if what we're proposing comes to pass, the 5 under agenda item D would probably just fade away, lack of usage, perhaps even archiving of the WECM courses that they're composed of, and then the NCCER new courses would become mainstream and solve it. So it's a two-pronged approach, maybe a two-pronged attack, if you will.
So we're going to take a bet here on this. And then we'll see what happens. I mean, but I do think you raised an excellent point. I was at a Railroad Commission meeting not too long ago, and of course about oil and gas, and you know, and mainly the meeting was about how do we get as much of it out of this ground as we possibly can. And then secondarily, and how do we train people to get as much out of it as a ground as we can, right? But it was interesting that the business and industry folks started talking about the different programs, and they were very quick to point out that when they hire someone, and there's one guy that was talking about it, that talked about it the most, was from East Texas. And so he was talking about Panola College has a program in petroleum extraction. And, and his point was, but at the end of the day, when I hire somebody to do the job, whether they come from the program in Panola or they come from the program in Midland, Odessa, I want to make sure they can do the same thing. And so he was arguing for that while the individual programs talk an awful lot about their local needs and catering to local business and industry, his point is I don't have any local needs. In that sense, I don't have needs, very many of them, that are restricted to my area. What I need is training across straight, so I can hire from anywhere and I can get what I need. So it goes back to the point that you were making. So I think this is one of those things that will bear some close watch over time to see how it's progressing, to make sure that we then don't turn around and just sort of reduplicate what we have now. We just go at it from a different angle, so to speak. So.
And if I could just quickly, and the meeting I shared, the comments I shared earlier about the railroad committee meeting, I was at a different meeting. We seldom go to the same meetings at the same time because there's more meetings than there are of us. But I related a similar experience to you earlier. And this might help you all a little bit feel more at ease. One of the things that we're encouraging the WECM committee to do, we talked about it was a field-driven process for years, and we've talked about how we've brought them into a board committee like this. And one of the things we've asked them to do is come up with a protocol of archiving courses for low use. And almost to the point that Rex just made of the Panola College's program versus Midland's program versus Houston's program. And so if we find that we have a bunch of courses, which I know we know this, but that we have, I don't know, whatever the third course is in oil and gas extraction program, just like we did in drafting, we found that we had a bunch of introductory drafting courses. We've asked them to start looking for a protocol and a process to archive those courses and move us to center, pick one. And then, so if we do this NCCER stuff and we don't move towards adoption, and it just spreads us further apart, hopefully those protocols will encompass a process to where we don't let it get away from us, But, so that's kind of, it, again, as I've referred to, trimming the trees and, at the top and the bottom and on the backside as well during the meeting today. We're looking at this from a multifold process. And so while I agree perhaps it is counterintuitive to add more courses, and perhaps Rex is right that, a couple of years from now, we'll just see that 3 colleges are using these and 3 are using those and 3 are using those. But hopefully we will see that we move around this standard. And of course, as business and industry drives the standards and says this is what we need. I was in a meeting nationally one time, and it's almost like, why can't welding 1301 be the same across the United States? I mean, an introductory welding course is an introductory welding course, right? I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive that everybody does it separately, but as Rex said, we have a 100-year tradition of all the colleges in Texas doing it differently. Can you imagine trying to have a national conversation of everybody agree what welding 1301 is? And again, as Rex said, we probably all know what the learning outcomes are, but boy, oh boy, trying to come up with the number and the title and the description.
So it's noon, it's about lunchtime, and we have this action item on the table to vote. Do we want to vote now and then go to lunch? So we had a second already. Should we re-verbalize what the motion was or just vote on it?
I think we know what it is.
Okay.
You can paraphrase it.
Doesn't, so, Natalie, you want to just restate the,
Restate the motion. Add NCCER rubric for electrical, plumbing, and pipe fitting in the Wickham.
we've had a motion and a second already. We're going to vote on it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. Ayes, carry. So, to that point,
Okay, actually, we only really have one more agenda item, and
well, we've got to talk about any future additional construction programs of study and any other items,
Right.
That's what you're talking about? Okay.
right. And I guess, from our point of view, this committee has already tackled the most heavily populated disciplines. The remaining disciplines, we've talked about like carpentry and masonry. We even talked about at the meeting that one of the reasons we don't have students in community colleges in those programs is because they can basically either go to high school or just take one class at the college and they're immediately hired. So I guess the question becomes, is it really an associate degree level program? And especially that no colleges actually offer associate degrees in these programs. And we can maybe take recommendations, like Natalie said before, about adopting the NCCER versions for the carpentry and other programs. But as far as actually creating a subcommittee, and as I said before, we had the problem of we sent out a call for nominations and we maybe got one nominee in that process. And so there really isn't a lot of college program in that area. And that's pretty much the same for the remainder of the programs in this cluster.
I thought solar was one that was on the very first list that we got when we first started. There was a whole list of different programs, and yeah, and that's when we separated different programs of study and kind of lumped them together. Not saying that you're correct and we don't need to move on those other programs of study. I just want to make sure we're not missing anything either. If something's got to be reviewed, we should look at it. If not, then I don't have a problem moving on without them. Were you also suggesting just kind of pushing through and having lunch after or breaking? What were you?
Well, I guess I wanted to ask this committee as a question.
Since we only have one other item left, do we want to have just lunch or just push through and just finish it and then eat and then split? Push through? Guess we're pushing through. I'm good with that.
Okay.
And, maybe as information, all the stuff you've approved today has got to go out for comments. And then we have to go back to y'all, and y'all need to decide if those comments are substantive, if you need to act upon them, or if you think it's already been discussed and debated and all that kind of stuff, then the item, they'll just go forward to the board as presented. And there's a possibility that we kick something all the way back to the subcommittee as well, just for information's sake. But in the interim, while we're doing that stuff, we could go back and look at solar and anything else and provide y'all information about it. And then y'all could decide at that time if there's a need to reconvene or not reconvene, and that kind of stuff. But, kind of to Dwayne's point, in the coastal areas impacted by Hurricane Harvey, we worked with the Department of Labor, Texas Workforce Commission, and they put these grants out for short-term training opportunities, and they've had a very hard time, almost an impossible number of people have signed up for them. The students are just not there. And so you would think that if you have massive amount of debris and destruction and stuff, that there'd be people just, lining up for the training. And the training, even tuition could be paid through these grants. And so it was, as Dwayne kind of said, the programs are just not there. The colleges tried to build the programs, tried to offer. We talked about the concept of crisis to careers, kind of trying to start the, maybe as little as 64 hours worth of training and get your foot in the industry and then try to migrate. And they just are not attracting the students. I'm not saying that that's the end of the conversation by any means, but to Dwayne's point of trying to convene a subcommittee at this time, I'm not sure we're going to get it. But, and so if us getting you more information for number 5 suffices, then number 6, once we get the comments back, kind of determines if you have another meeting or not, yes or no, or we just take these to the board.
I mean, I do think it would be instructive to go back to that list that was created at the beginning of the committee, and we can get some more up-to-date information about enrollment numbers and that kind of stuff, and then just have y'all take a look at it, see if there's enough there to warrant dealing with more. I mean, we're sort of going through this with the fields of study where we've just about got the top 25 transfer majors done, and so I asked for an analysis of the next 25, so what are the top 50? And once you get down into the 40th most popular transfer major in the state of Texas, some of those are now down into the single digits. In other words, there are less than 10 students across the state have transferred from one institution to another one in that major, which tells you a lot about just how popular the top 25 really are in a way, because it covers 60 to 65% of all students. And so we may be getting into some of that same kind of territory here, where you have very few programs out there and you have very few students, and so then is it really, and it may or may not be, but it's a decision you can look at that information and have some discussion about whether it's really important to pursue that, and then how far, so we've had that same discussion about, so how far down the line do we go then with this, so.
When you're talking about solar, you could probably add wind, because you're talking about renewable energy. Why isn't that already included in the field of study on some of the electrical? Because it's just the source, whether it's coal, whether it's gas, on the generation, the transmission is probably pretty much the same. It doesn't seem that it would even come close to warranting a special field of study, but it should be addressed in some degree in the other, part of the curriculum, I would think.
And we talked about wind and solar briefly as part of power generation, and that was one of the programs of study we just decided we weren't the appropriate people to deal with it.
And I think what we're going to find is that most of the courses for solar are actually under instrumentation and control, which is going to get us into manufacturing. And the uniqueness about the wind turbine is it's a couple hundred feet up in the air. And actually, I worked with power generation before as a group. I'm an educator or a bureaucrat, depending on your point of view. But
I used to be an educator.
thank you. But one of the people we were working with pointed out that, in essence, the difference between a wind turbine and a hydroelectric dam is that the person working in the dam climbs down the ladder in the morning to work on the turbine in the instrument and control panel, and then at the wind turbine they climb up, and at the end of the day they both repeat. And the point was, in essence, you got a big old generator down there, a turbine, the water's driving it and the wind's driving that one, but the instrumentation and control to the distribution grid and all that kind of stuff is the same job. And so I think we'll find that stuff in manufacturing.
So we'll wait for additional information on number 5, I guess. And then for our next meeting, like we just said, we'll just wait for the public comments that will take, I'm sure, months.
They have to be out for 30 days.
Okay.
So,
Uh,
repost.
Okay. And then we'll go schedule for a meeting, follow-up, if need be,
If
or
needed,
as need
yes.
be. Anything else?
Well, before we adjourn, if this is the last time this group meets formally, or at least formally for a period of time, we want to thank you for all your time, effort, energy in this conversation. You know, we kind of apologize for some of the delays that we've encountered from, you know, I've talked about those, both weather delays and staffing delays, but we are moving forward. This is it's a challenging conversation, but I do believe that we've laid the foundation for the first level, and then hopefully we can get other groups to come, that y'all are welcome to participate, and as we build this, move forward. And so just thank you for your time and your efforts.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, we really do appreciate the time that y'all have put into this and the thought that you've given it to. So, I mean, obviously, y'all have thought through a lot of these issues, and we really do appreciate that. So, thank you.
I guess too, we'll say, as a committee, we'll say thank you to y'all three and Elizabeth as well for kind of dealing with some of our stupidity of not knowing some of this stuff, to be honest. Kind of bailing us out where needed, so especially Jerry and I, so appreciate it.
Anybody have anything else? Any other comments? No? And we'll need a motion to, no. I can make it.
Under Robert's Rules of Order, the only motion a chair can make is a motion to adjourn, and it does not require a second. So you can make the motion and then call for the vote.
Well, I'll move to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.